So not all that long ago, I came across a Facebook post that was asking all about what the best way of securing world peace would be. And I don't know really how to approach this question other than by looking at the conflicts that abound around the globe at the moment. There's the humanitarian crisis in Yemen, there's the war in Palestine, there's the war in Ukraine, of course, and then there's the possibility that China is going to try and overtake Taiwan at some point. I invade Taiwan and reclaim it supposedly. And there's all these issues around the globe which are causing huge amounts of conflict. The war in Ukraine is an extraordinarily destructive war. It's claimed, I think, at least 1 million lives at the moment, all told, and it shows no signs of abating anytime really in the near future. However, the war in Ukraine is an example of a resource war. It's a war obliquely fought over natural resources. It's a war fought for the titanium, iron, cobalt, I think they have also in Ukraine in quite high quantities, as well as natural gas and coal. And uranium also is a very big resource that Ukraine has a great deal of. So there's all these different mineral resources that Ukraine possesses, all these different fossil fuel resources as well. And this is a very, very tantalizing prospect for Russia, since Russia wants to sweep in and harvest up those resources and sell them, because from the Russian perspective, they're running out of supplies in the West to sell coal to, because we've been progressively shutting down our coal-fired power stations in favour of renewable alternatives, as I think we ought to be doing. Um, and a lot of natural gas from Russia was piped through Ukraine before the start of the war. However, Putin has taken control of those supply lines and I believe disabled those pipelines quite early on during the Ukraine conflict. And then there's also the issue of the Nord Stream 1 and Nord Stream 2 pipelines, which went from Russia to Germany. Those have now both been disabled, as I understand it. And who could be behind that, I wonder, other than Vladimir Putin? No one is behind other than Vladimir Putin. But yeah, it serves the Russian strategic interests to try and dominate oil and gas pipelines, because if you reduce the supply of something, the price of it, of course, goes up. So this is what they're trying to do. They're harvesting the dregs of the oil and natural gas that they have, and they're creating this conflict to try and radically inflate the price of the natural resources there. This is exactly what the United States did in Iraq as well. The people who complain about 9/11 being an inside job or say it's not an inside job or to cause the war in Iraq, they're kind of something that they used to fall back on very much is that, oh, it would be easier to buy the oil. Like the thing is, the United States already owns the oil that's in Iraq and Saudi Arabia, and had done since the Bitter Lake Agreement in 1945, between Franklin Delano Roosevelt and the leader of Saudi Arabia at the time. What the Iraq War ended up doing was it tripled oil prices, for the oil coming from the oil fields of Saudi Arabia and Iraq via Kuwait and thence back into the global economy. It tripled the price of oil. So who was making money off of the Iraq War? Really, anyone with serious money put into oil, crude oil. They were making money that way. I think we all kind of realised that at the time. We knew the Iraq War was over oil. As for what the war in Afghanistan was over, that was very likely over opium. Yeah, really, it was to control the poppy fields of Afghanistan and control where 90% of the world's illegal supplies of heroin come from, the opium of Afghanistan. And it's also to do with Afghani rare earth metals such as lithium and cobalt, which, as I understand it, abound in quite high quantities in Afghanistan, for the construction of batteries, and now we have all these electric vehicles and so on. We want those resources. So the thing is, in Ukraine, it serves the strategic interest of the United States, NATO, etc., to defend Ukraine against Russia's advances. Since on the one hand, Russia wants to increase the price of their own commodities to sell on the European market, and if they don't sell it on the European market, they'll sell it to the Chinese, their oil and natural gas, and their coal. Um, on the other hand, they want to claim Ukraine's natural resources also to increase the stock of commodity that they have to sell and use the war also as a kind of a smokescreen behind which to raise prices for all those commodities. So that's the Russian perspective on things. However, the Western perspective on things is we also want the supplies of coal, oil, and natural gas coming through Ukraine and coming from Ukraine, and it serves our strategic interest also to try and include Ukraine in NATO and within all these security pacts within the West, I guess, Europe and the United States, to include Ukraine within that family of nations and to sponsor Ukraine's efforts against Russia because we want the natural resources as well and we want them at a reasonable price. We also want to stabilize and control Ukraine's agrarian economy, which is very, very important globally since they export huge amounts of wheat, potatoes, um, various other things all around the world, particularly to poorer countries in the Middle East. And we want that all stabilized because if the agrarian economy of Ukraine isn't stabilized, it will lead to more instability around the world, in the Middle East in particular, in North Africa in particular, and it will generally cause huge amounts of problems globally if we don't do that. So there's very much this tussle going on, very much this balancing act between different spheres of globalist corporate interest within Ukraine and outside of it. And we can see this conflict very much as the culmination of a series of conflicts, both in the Middle East and now in Europe, I think, that began over resources with the Iraq conflict in 2003, and that has been sending shockwaves internationally, notably the Arab Spring, and then you get all sorts of fallout from that, such as the incredibly destructive and bloody civil war in Syria. And ultimately the consequence of this is we're at the choking point. Well, the reason for these things happening as consequences, I should say, is because we're at the choking point now of the resource curves. We've got about 30 years of natural gas left. Natural gas is very, very important, not just for heating people's homes, it's actually most important in agriculture because we use natural gas, methane from the ground, to reverse harbour process ammonium nitrate and use that to fertilise our crops. So in the name of stabilising our agrarian outputs, or in terms of optimizing those agrarian outputs, we really need nitrate fertilizer. Otherwise, we wouldn't be getting the crop yields that we're having at the moment, and then we would enter crises of, well, mass malnutrition, mass starvation, possibly. Since if we don't have those things, if we don't have a means of fixing nitrogen in soil, we won't be able to grow the sorts of crops that we've been growing, and then there'll be all sorts of issues such as lack of food basically for society if that's allowed to reach its terminus without anything coming in to replace that. So what could come to replace that? And this is where world peace, I suppose, comes into it. Cannabis can actually replace that. That's one eye-opening and surprising thing about the plant. It aids soil structure, it fixes nitrogen in soil, it can be used, yes, to do these things that we currently use nitrate fertilizer for, and traditionally hemp, which is the cannabis planting, which is a different variant of the same plant, was traditionally used in crop rotations for this exact reason, and used to create incredibly strong fibre, plastics, fuel. You can create all sorts of things using hemp. Building materials, livestock feed, the list is endless of the things we can do with the cannabis plant. So I think that would be my major point of, well, the thing I'd like to promote very much in this video, obviously, is the legalization of cannabis such that we might employ it to its full effect in agriculture and use it to wean ourselves off and reduce our dependency on nitrate fertilizers, and moving towards these more rotation models, these more organic regenerative models using hemp in very large quantities at scale. Right? This is what we need to achieve. We need to somehow be employing this across our entire agricultural system. And remember that we've had green revolutions, new agricultural revolutions with mechanization in the 20th century, and we've never used hemp in rotations like this with our crops before. So the challenge we're facing on this front, so far as it comes to weaning ourselves off resources, natural gas and so on, is staggering. It's very, very huge. We'll need to see revolutionary, transformative changes in our agrarian systems to accommodate for this loss of natural gas. Because once the natural gas is all used up, we can't get it back. We can't derive enough methane to adequately supply our crops. Our crops, crucially, and this is what a lot of people aren't told at school, are reliant heavily on fossil fuels. And there's this vegan argument going around now about cow farts and methane emissions and so on and so forth, and that's all a distraction, and it causing the greenhouse effect. That's all a load of nonsense, really. I mean, what cows eat, they eat grass, right, which traps carbon dioxide and they release methane. So it's net zero. It's carbon neutral, I should say, in terms of carbon dioxide equivalent. They consume the crops that they consume, take up the amount of carbon that they emit. So there's a kind of a closed loop there. There's no net emissions from cattle, for instance. But what we're not taught is that our agriculture is heavily dependent on fossil fuel, and it's diminishing this dependency that's going to see us through the 21st century. It's going to become absolutely necessary at some point because the clock is ticking on all this stuff. And it's not just fuel in tractors. That could be replaced quite easily. I guess we could have electric tractors quite easily, and we could have or hydrogen tractors even. That technology has been demonstrated, as I understand it, by New Holland. But what we're facing in agriculture is we need something to replace nitram with, and we're going to need to replace phosphorus as well, and potassium as well, fertilizer, and all these sorts of things at some point. Though I think the phosphorus and potassium issues, those are far less pressing than the nitrate issues and the ammonium nitrate issue that we currently derive from natural gas. So this is a big problem. It's a big worry. It's a large, multifaceted, global, international problem that affects mechanized systems of agriculture all around the world. And we have no current tenable replacement to it. However, using hemp, I'd have said that it would not only augment our agricultural output to such a great extent that we would be producing vastly in excess of the livestock feed that we currently do at the moment. Yields would substantially increase, I think, in terms of textiles and all these great things that we can derive from hemp. And I think it would be a huge boon to the global economy if we were using that crop to its full effect. And it might, it would dampen down the need to have a war in Ukraine in the first place. It would provide us with resource security here in the West. And if we were to use the money that we would derive from having a secure, stable, sustainable society, we could sponsor the rebuilding of Russia, encourage Russia to do the same in their own crop rotations. And yes, perhaps something like that could lead to world peace. So yeah, cannabis, ladies and gentlemen, hemp. We need it, we need it, we need it. It's very, very important. And I just know all my videos on YouTube are getting suppressed about cannabis because they always do worse in the ratings on here. I hate this society sometimes, and policies of Google and so on. But yeah, that's roughly what I wanted to say about world peace. So thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. Love you lots. Bye.